So why did the rebellions fail? The revolts against William had many things in common. One thing they had in common was that they all failed. In 1067, Edric the Wild ran away and hid in Wales. In 1068, Earls Edwin and Morcar didn't even start to fight. They surrendered to William and Edgar ran away to Scotland. In 1069, the two northern rebellions led to the deaths of 3,900 Normans. But still William won, as King Sweyn was bribed to go away and Edgar ran away again to Scotland. In revenge, William committed the harrying of the North. And that's a photo or drawing of the harrying of the North there. In 1070 to 71, Herod the Wake's plan was thwarted when monks told William Hereward's location and King Sweyn was bribed to go away. Hereward escaped, but other Anglo-Saxon rebels had their hands and feet cut off as punishment. And in 1075, Walter betrayed the Norman earls. William was away in Normandy and he had left Lanfranc in control, and Waltheof told Lanfranc that Ralph and Roger were planning to revolt. Ralph escaped abroad, Roger was imprisoned, and although Waltheof had told Lanfranc of the plans, he was the one that got executed. So let's look at this question. Why did the rebellions fail? Because this is the background rather than the reasons why. So why did the revolts fail? There's two sides to this argument. The rebels' weaknesses versus William's strengths. Let's look at the rebels' weaknesses first, as there's less to say in regards to this. So one weakness was the rebels lacked a clear, strong, single leader. And because of this, they often lacked unity. So if we think about who was involved, you have Edgar Atheling, but he was still young, a teenager, and lacked military experience, and he kept running away to Scotland. You had Edwin and Morcar, but they were only earls. They didn't have a great deal of clout or power. You had King Sweyn of Denmark, but he was only really interested in himself. You had Hereward the Wake, but he was just a thane. And then you had Roger, Ralph and Waltheof, but they wanted to divide England in three, so couldn't really agree on who was going to be the clear leader. For these reasons, the rebels were weak and therefore the revolts failed because they never united around one single leader. The rebel forces were also weak in comparison to William's army. They were fewer in number, less equipped, less trained, and often ran away from William's forces, fearful of the result of any conflict. Therefore, the revolts failed because the rebel forces were weaker than William's. Finally, the rebels often stabbed each other in the back. So, King Sweyn often accepted bribes to go away and not actually fight alongside the rebels. This happened twice, once in the Northern Revolts and once in the revolt of Hereward the Wake. Also, in the final revolt, the 1075 Norman Earls Revolt, Waltheof, the Anglo-Saxon Earl, stabbed the two Norman Earls, Ralph and Roger, in the back, by telling Lanfranc the plans for the revolt, and therefore disloyalty led the rebels to fail. So let's look now at William's strengths. This is the opposite side of the argument and can be divided into two. So if you're writing an essay on this, you'll write one paragraph on the rebels' weaknesses and 2 paragraphs on William's strengths. So one kind of strength William had was his violence. William used his army very well to put down revolts very quickly and successfully. And that is why the revolts failed, because William reacted to situations quickly before the rebel forces could gain more support. Also, William's army was very threatening. It was larger than the rebel army, it was better trained and better armed, and therefore the rebels often ran away from William's army, weren't successful when they met in conflict, and failed. Now, this is a picture of Harry from Harry Potter, because one of the ways William used violence to defeat the rebels was through the harrying of the North. This led over 100,000 people to die, as after the 1069 rebellion, William destroyed crops, burned houses and killed livestock, to the deaths of 100,000 Anglo-Saxons. This led the revolt to fail for 2 reasons. One, the people of the North were so concerned with just feeding themselves and surviving, they did not have time or energy to revolt. Secondly, there were just not enough people alive in the North to form a strong enough revolt to ever threaten William in that region again. Also, William punished those people who revolted to deter future people from revolting. The harrying of the North is one kind of example of this. Another example is after Hereward the Wake's revolt. Although Hereward escaped, the other rebels didn't, and as punishment, William's army cut off their hands and feet and gouged out their eyes. This scared potential future rebels from ever revolting, and was a successful deterrent. So that's one of William's strengths, how he used violence to stop the rebels from being successful. Another of William's strengths was his non-violent tactics. William convinced the Pope to support him in the Battle of Hastings. That's why he had the papal banner. The people of England, seeing William's victory and the papal banner, sometimes thought that William had been chosen by God, and therefore they gave William their loyalty. And this was one reason why there weren't more rebels. Also, William built castles. Castles were really important in helping William crush the rebels. William built castles in anywhere that there was a rebel threat. For example, in the northern rebellions of 1068, he built 2 castles in York. Castles were important because they provided the Norman army with a place where they could easily defend themselves, and they could shelter and store their goods. So the castles offered the Norman army protection. They were also a symbol of the Norman strength that almost deterred the rebels, because it was a constant reminder of how strong the Normans were. Really importantly, William used bribery to divide the rebels and to get them sometimes to betray each other. So, for example, he bribed King Sweyn not once but twice to sail back to Denmark. He did this in the 1069 Northern Rebellion and also in Hereward the Wake's rebellion of 1070. So here you can see a really nice connection between William's strengths and the rebels' weakness. So William was able to think tactically and use money to divide the rebels and get them to betray each other. And he must have known that this was a rebel weakness, that the rebels weren't really determined to win and could be bribed. Another example of William using bribery was in one specific revolt. This was the revolt of Hereward the Wake, where he is thought to have bribed monks to tell him where Hereward and forces were hiding in the marshes of East Anglia. And if he hadn't bribed the monks to do that, that revolt might have been successful, because the marchers were treacherous, and if William was wandering around those trying to find Hereward, he may have lost many of his men to the sinking mud marshes. And finally, a small example of William's creative strategy was that in the Hereward the Wake revolt, William got his men to use their initiative to cross the marshes by tying together small boats and putting planks across them so they could walk over the dangerous sinking mud and the water. So here you can see the reasons why the revolt failed. Paragraph 1, the rebels' weaknesses. Paragraph 2, William's use of violence. Paragraph 3, William's non-violent tactics.